good evening, and welcome to not company culture. It is leadership conversation. I was on that this morning. So good evening. Come on in, join us, join this conversation. I'm telling you, this is a conversation you do not want to miss. We're going to take a few minutes here and make sure we're sharing it with folks who will be watching. We're going to get all that straight while you're coming in and joining us. We are so happy this evening to have um, Paul Semaniski with us this evening. He is from ThoughtBlazers LLC, and tonight's topic is Think Your Way into Better. So that's what we're thinking about, and that's what we're talking about. And it's really around what do you mean by all of that? Critical thinking. We've talked about critical thinking. You've heard about it in the past, but have we been doing it? Mm. But if we haven't, now's the time to do it. I also want to remind you of my colleagues here um, and give them a moment to briefly introduce themselves again, remind them who they are. Again, I'm Yvette Owens, half of the Destiny Speak team, and then I'll pass it on to the other half.
Hello, hi, I'm Edwina Cogdell from Destiny Speak. Welcome to Leadership Conversations.
Awesome. And then let's just go to David, and then we'll go up, and then we'll jump right in with Paul.
Okay, so David Gallagher, I'm the half and the whole of leadership by design. So it's doing a leadership development, executive coaching, etc. So thank you all for being here.
Awesome. And Delpha D.
Yeah, and I'm Delpha. I am with Delpha D, and I am a blogger, author, podcaster, and we talk all things leadership and leadership development.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. And then our guest, who is sitting in the middle of the screen, in the middle of the stage. We are so glad to have him here. Sorry, I did broke one of the rules that I said not to do. Um, so he's here from Thought Blazers, and we are so glad to have him here. Paul, why don't you introduce yourself before we jump into the conversation?
Sure. Thanks, Yvette. I am Paul Semaniski, and I am the founder and CEO of ThoughtBlazers LLC. And we provide solutions for marketing and change management. And at ThoughtBlazers, we like to think of ourselves as the fusion of imagination and implementation. So we can help an organization with whatever they might need. If they need strategy, we can help. If they need to implement that strategy, we're there to help as well with our whole team. So again, thank you so much for having me. I'm just deeply honored and privileged to be here this evening.
Awesome, awesome. So again, talking about critical thinking and the power of it. We are all leaders here. We've often wanted people on our team, and teams that are critical thinking, not that are really adding to the organization. So we're gonna we're gonna jump right in. So Paul, help us define what is critical thinking.
Sure. Well, what I did is I got on the Google, of course, and started to look at a lot of the textbook definitions there. And what I tried to put together was a quick synthesis. So let me run this by you guys. Critical thinking is the process of objectively gathering, analyzing, and evaluating information through observation, common sense, experience, and reasoning, with the goal of developing a belief, strategy, solution to a problem, or course of action. And this process includes logical assumptions and also assesses itself. So not only do you have this process, but during and after the process, you take a look and you say, how did I do? So you're critically thinking, you're critically thinking. So it's a very interesting feedback loop you go to. Then what I tried to do is really kind of put it into a real context for organizations. So I tried to take the academic and really say, hey, how does this work in the real world? So I think in the context of an organization, there are a couple ways that critical thinking is applied. First off, it needs to be consistent and work in concert with the company's other key disciplines and priorities. So for example, they may include employee care and flourishing, communications, sales and marketing, customer relationship management, innovation and entrepreneurship, organizational excellence, and change management. And then second, that process also needs to reflect the values of the organization. For example, integrity, authenticity, passion and motivation, social responsibility, diversity and inclusion, and empathy. So in essence, critical thinking, the process needs to be part of the company's DNA, and it needs to be blended with all the other aspects of the organization's core values and mission. So I'd love to give you a real quick example of that if I could.
Awesome.
Great. Okay. And then love to get your feedback on everything. So I was once with a company that was constantly going through all different kinds of mergers and acquisitions. And I was in a division where we were merging with a company, and I was on the communications team to let our distributors and also our employees know where we were at. So one of the things that we did as part of our regimen was to once a week put out a communication to our employees. Here is where we're at in terms of the merger or the partnership. So we got to the point where we ran into a week where we didn't really have anything going on. So I went to the leadership team and I said, okay, what are we going to do for this week? Nothing going on, so no need to send an email out. I said, okay. So I thought about that a little bit and kind of took it back to my communications team. And when you run that through the critical thinking filter, you say, okay, as a pure exercise of logic, nothing to report, no need to send out a communication. But you look at the company's values, what it is we're trying to promote within the organization. And one of those things that we were trying to get everybody on board with was that this new organization that's coming together is about communicating, letting you know what's going on, being empathetic. And so we went back to the leadership team and we said, you know what? I think we still ought to do an email. And we ought to just say, no new developments this week.
Right.
But, you know, we love you. We're there for you. This is going to be an exciting time. It gave us an opportunity to really kind of talk about the key benefits of the merger again. And it was one of these little bit of a pushback, you know, like, hey, nothing new to report, so why are we doing this? But we really, really said, let's do this. Well, that was one of the most positive feedback loops that we got from our employees. They said, wow, you know, you guys didn't really have anything that new that was going on, but just the fact that you clued us in, we really, really appreciate that. And this sounds like the kind of organization that we want to be a part of. And so people really appreciated the fact that we used that. I called it, you know, the nothing happening communication to really put forth the values of our organization. So that's kind of a practical way of taking the logical, objective nature of critical thinking and then blending it with your company's culture. So
that's awesome.
yeah, we'd love to get your guys' feedback on that.
Yeah, when you were bringing up that example, I was thinking that, you know what, if we don't help them, they'll make up their own story, right?
Yes, nature important vacuum. Yeah,
and that's what we talk about when we do a lot of change management training. Let's do the communication that you need so that people really know the story and know what's happening, because otherwise, absent of it, they will make it up. And it will not, it's harder to undo the story they create than the story that really is happening, right?
So true.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love the definitions that you combined and used. It spoke to me as from a perspective of it's a verb. Critical thinking is a verb. It requires action, and it may be action in your brain or action in the space that you're working in. I also really loved, and I think this is so key today. You hear all these people talk about you need to be a strategic thinker, where strategy is just one part of critical thinking.
Yes.
It's one segment. So the idea that no, you don't want strategic thinkers, you want critical thinkers because they're thinking holistically, beginning, middle, end, and then the before and after, versus just thinking about that strategy to execute. Because then it feels to me like, and especially with your story, if you're a critical thinker, you don't miss the human factor. If you're a strategic thinker, you will always miss the human factor.
Right.
And Paul, so good points from all of you. And so the other thing, even though your story could be a simple one, and it would be so easy to say, well, nothing happened this week. Why should we bother communicating? Nothing happened. We know that. Yes, but nobody else knows that. And I know Yvette and Delph already reacted to that. But the essence of critical thinking is the second tier of questioning to say, okay, well, what happens if we don't communicate? What are the implications of that? How are people going to interpret that? Is it going to be positive, going to be negative, etc.? Especially if we have a track record of communicating and we're trying to build a value around being transparent and communication. And if we suddenly don't do it, there must be something they're hiding all of a sudden.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
And we've spent time in the past talking about being the value add in the room. Here's a great example of if you're the critical thinker and you have feedback because you've thought about what else could happen, you're adding value.
Absolutely.
Right. Yep.
Absolutely.
Well, it sounds to me, Paul, that, the science, part of the logic piece, it doesn't, it's not mutually exclusive from the humanity piece.
That's
so
right.
Bringing them both together just create, which is something that most of the time you don't see happening.
Right.
Critical thinking is felt like more from a logical perspective, and if it touches the human, fine. But it feels like you found a way to connect to those human values of the organization and bring that together as you're making this business decisions. So
Right.
I think that is an awesome way to conduct business, and what it does for that culture is amazing. Because guess what? Culture is made up of humans.
Yes.
For sure.
Love it.
Totally.
For sure. So we want to just, as we're prepping for the next question, we just want to thank everybody who's joining us. Keep those comments coming. Engage with us in this conversation, because we really believe that it is important, as we're preparing for the future, that we really understand what critical thinking is and we become comfortable and engaging in it, because we're not going to be able, as Edwina's saying, create that culture or get to that culture, whatever is our next, right? Because it's certainly not what we've had before, without individuals engaging in it. So thanks for joining us. If you have comments, add them. If you are listening to the replay, please add your comments or questions, and we will certainly get back to you. So back to the team. David, you're on mute.
Yes, I knew that. Okay, it was really a test for you. So thank you, and you did well. So
Thank
that's
you.
good. So Paul, how would you describe how critical thinking is different from other types of thinking?
Okay, David. So first off, maybe a couple of ideas about what critical thinking is not. It's not overthinking, right? It's not, as an example, we all know we get the emails, the texts, the emojis, okay? What's the tone of this email? The text. What does this emoji mean, or what does this lack of an emoji mean, right? How come he or she didn't use uppercase and lowercase when they were sending a text back, right? This churning, overthinking, trying to read into something and trying to figure out where the other person's coming from. Nope, that's not critical thinking. It's also not eternal skepticism. You ever met an eternal skeptic? Somebody who is always kind of more on the negative, always questioning, never really going to take a position one way or the other because they just can't trust the information so far. And I think to some degree, our culture has kind of idolized people that are skeptic. It's sort of like if you're an eternal skeptic, you've got to be very bright and very intelligent because you're so smart. You just got so much brain power that's working on these ideas that you just can't stop because you're so brilliant, right? And I think healthy skepticism is great, but at some point you need to draw a conclusion and then be supportive of the conclusion, work with the organization, and move forward. Critical thinking is also not paralysis by analysis, right? Anybody out there know people that they're just a little different than the eternal skeptic? The eternal skeptic is always kind of negative. The paralysis by analysis person, they want to be positive, but they just can't decide which way to go. Yeah. And a lot of times our work culture says, that's great. That means that person's very brainy and bright and brilliant. Yes, but if they can't finally come to a conclusion, then they're not properly employing critical thinking skills. And so you've got to get off paralysis by analysis if you're going to be a critical thinker. Key things that would characterize critical thinking: defining the problem, logical assumptions, intellectual curiosity, objectivity, openness to all relevant viewpoints and factual information. Okay, not just one side of the story, but let me take a look at some other alternative viewpoints and data sets and fact sets to kind of round out my thinking. Other types of thinking that are not critical thinking that's based more on feeling and intuition, political correctness, subjectivity, thinking that's overly impacted by emotion or feeling. And again, I'm not saying that any of these things are wrong to be part of your critical thinking, but if you're really kind of anchored or tied to something that's more subjective than objective, then you really have to watch out for that balance. You may be veering off the path of critical thinking.
Yeah, so I like that. And I liken it to the old psychological stress curve. Extremely low stress is not helpful. Extremely high stress is not helpful. What is helpful is stress in the middle, at the top of that curve. So that's the same thing as skepticism. So skepticism can be viewed as a negative thing, especially if it's taken to the extreme. But if you switch that word to what you mentioned about intellectual curiosity, it's just asking questions to make sure, do we have all the information that we need? And you also talked about, without saying confirmation bias, you also talked about, I'm not looking for information that confirms what I already think. I'm looking for all the information so I can make a decision. I also don't care who it's coming from. I don't have a bias against the person who's giving me the information. So that takes a lot of discipline to take out our emotion and our biases and just look at the information for what the information is worth. So good points. What about others? Are the others in the group?
Well, I was thinking, when you talk about intellectual curiosity, like, when do you have enough information? Because that's where I see people falling into paralysis analysis. Sometimes I've heard it called analysis paralysis. Like, when do you have enough information to make a decision?
Right. Yeah, I hear in what we're talking about, critical thinking requires risk taking in the asking of information, in the reaching the decision, and then articulating the decision based on the information provided, and then in being okay if there's something missing. And so it's that ability to be vulnerable. I use risk taking, but really it's vulnerability plus risk taking that makes you an effective critical thinker.
Yes, good point.
So, Paul, in your opinion, are critical thinkers born, or can you improve it as you go along?
Oh, I think you can definitely improve it. Um, in fact, one of the questions that Yvette shared, and I think it gets right into this, Edwina, is what are the types of things that could make people a better critical thinker? And one of my tried and true resources is the Stephen Covey book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the reasons I really like that is because it's very, very much about critical thinking, and it also involves personal as well as professional goal settings. And so it's not only, I think, a great educational tool for an employee to be able to go through that, but I think as they go through it, there's probably a good likelihood they're going to say, wow, I'm also working through some issues here on my personal life as part of this workbook that comes with the Covey book. Hey, this is going to be very valuable in all the different problems that I have in life. And I think that's another thing to be mindful of, is that, critical thinking is just not limited to the workplace or to academia. It's really can be a part of any kind of personal family situation that you may be involved in. The other thing that I really like in terms of case studies, there is a great case study on critical thinking, and I'll give you the reference here. It's called the Sellmore Company, Sellmore Company case study. Sellmore Company case study. So if you Google that, it's published by the Management Accounting Quarterly, spring of 2017. It's a really, really cool case study, and it's free, which is also nice. But it's been tried and true now for a number of years, and it's what I like about it is it starts off as a very seemingly simple case study. It has to do about increasing sales. That's where they get the name Sellmore. But as it goes, they begin to introduce other things into the case. And so all of a sudden you find yourself in a very, very challenging critical thinking situation. So I think case studies, books like the Covey book, particularly if you can get something that's got a book and a workbook like the 7 Habits, and you can seek out a mentor, let's say, that will go through that workbook with you, that can be a life-changing kind of coursework to go through. So.
And I also think that if you take some of those things that you said, if you say, okay, for this 4 to 6 week period, I'm going to focus on, as I'm thinking, to make sure I'm not being biased in my thinking. And then you could take another period of time and say, I'm going to make sure that I'm really doing research and not just take things on the surface. I'm really going to investigate. And you could take another period of time and say, I'm not going to infer anything in this. I'm going to really explore, right? So there are really practical ways for every individual to be able to increase that critical thinking. There's about, I think, as you mentioned, there's about 5 or 6 critical keys to critical thinkers. So take each one of them and practice, because we may know about it and you can learn about it, but until you actually implement it and put it into practice, you really can't become strong in it. And one of the things that I found just recently was the bias piece, because you can think you're open all day long, but let a situation come up where now it's going against what you would do in that scenario. Now you've got to back out and say, you know what? I'm having a bias moment here. And
Yeah.
I need to really, and why am I having that moment? Where is it coming from? And what am I going to do about it in the future? So yeah, I think very practical. Yes, resources are great. I believe we should be readers. I believe we should study and learn. But today, if you leave this meeting today, right now at 8 o'clock when we turn off, if you want to do something to increase your critical thinking, stop taking things for surface value. When someone says something to you, ask more questions so that you get a full understanding. We run into it all the time in various businesses. People use acronyms, right? And that acronym you assume means the same thing that it means for you, and it doesn't. So it's just, again, as those you mentioned earlier, those small things we can do and practice that will help us to increase our critical thinking. Stop assuming and taking things for granted.
Yes. Great points.
All right. So is there any space where critical thinking can be a negative trait?
Well, I look at critical thinking as a tool, and as such, it's not inherently positive or negative, but it can definitely be misunderstood, misused, misapplied, or overemphasized. Give you one example. Trying to objectively solve a problem that somebody has when all they're really looking for is a listening ear. How many times have we had a situation where someone just wants to sit down and essentially pour their heart out to you, and you have to have the wisdom to say, okay, what's going on here? Are they really looking for me to help them solve this issue, this dilemma? Or are they really just wanting someone who's going to listen and maybe ask some helpful questions, right? So I think that's a big one. Some of us who by nature might be problem solvers, we're just more than happy to, because, you know, we want to help people. So we try to hop in and try to help somebody, and they're really not looking for that. They're just looking for a listening ear. And that takes some soft skills and some discernment. But I think over time, as you get to know folks and you develop those skills yourself, that you'll get to know the difference.
So, Paul, I can solve that for you if you'd like.
Yes, please. Good one.
But it is true. And I wonder if, critical thinking is potentially one of the most overused set of words to define so many different things that we want people to do. And that's where negativity comes in, when it's not clearly defined by the organization. And then it is expected to be executed in a certain way. But if you don't know what the heck it is, or people are viewing it in your organization, how are you going to know? How are you going to be unbiased or call out the bias if it's there?
Yeah, very true. And that's why I really think that critical thinking has to be one of those core components of an organization's DNA.
Yeah, so clearly defined.
Clearly defined, and then whatever business issue you have, there it is. You're applying those skills.
Yep.
We have a comment from one of our listeners. I'm going to read through it. It says, I found the hardest regarding critical thinking is when you receive an email from someone and they provide information they are looking for. And as you read it, you realize what they're typed in the email is not what they want. I have to reply back in the email and restate the information a different way, as I have an idea what they really are trying to say. They reply, yes, that's it.
That it's the critical. It's like literally, it's the translation of corporate speak. It takes critical thinking to translate the corporate speak. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Very, very true. And sort of the corollary with that one too is that the impulse that you have as you get an email that looks to be offensive to you, and you're like, by golly, I'm just going to give it right back to him right now. I'm going to hit those keys. And it's like, nope, that's not critical thinking. First off, you're not even really sure. You may not be sure what the intent is. And secondly, what really is the best way to kind of solve this communication issue? Perhaps it is to pick up the phone and have a conversation, right? But again, that's that email comes in and you allow the emotional decision making to sort of take over, as opposed to the let's take a deep breath, let's look about, and you're not going to go through a full-blown critical thinking process, but you're going to go through that initial step of, okay, let me just see what they've said here. Okay, I need clarification now. Even though it looks like they might be attacking me, I need some clarification, and perhaps it's better if I pick up the phone and find out what's going on.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on, we've already kind of talked about how you can become a critical thinker, but the next question we wanted to ask is, what do non-critical thinkers think about critical thinkers?
Well,
How are they perceived by non-critical thinkers?
yeah, I do have a couple of notes here, Yvette. That's a big issue. I think that, a non-critical thinker, they can perceive people that are employing critical thinking skills as being non-empathetic, not caring, not passionate, more caring about the process or the information than the person. And so that really speaks to people that are engaging with critical thinking techniques to really be aware of who they're speaking with, who the stakeholders are, what is the personality style, and we've all done Myers-Briggs and other types of models to help us with that. But when I'm communicating with somebody and I'm in critical thinking mode, I have to be very careful that I don't come across as someone who is just a process, a tactical oriented person, and I don't really care about who the other individual is.
Yeah, and I think for me, I also have to make sure I'm not coming across as interrogating, right? I'm
Right.
really trying, because critical thinkers, we ask a lot of questions, and it can feel like, oh my God, I feel like I'm on, on an interrogation. Like the lights are beaming down on me, and so I have to make sure I pace my questioning. I involve conversation in between my questioning so that they don't feel like I'm on an attack, because I'm just going after, I want this information. And so I'm really engaging in a conversation, and it's back and forth. But the person on the other side of the table may feel like, whoa, come up for some air. Give me a
Yeah.
break here.
Yeah.
So we have to really pace ourselves when you are a critical thinker, expound more in between some of those questions that you would be asking.
When I think sometimes people think it's going to take more time and I
Mm,
need to make a decision now,
right.
that whole process. So, just thinking through it, okay, step one, I got to do this, define the problem. Step two, I got to do this. And
Yes.
so they're like, okay, but I don't have time for that.
Hmm.
I need to make a decision right now.
Right.
How do you get around that?
It's definitely a challenge. I think certainly being somebody who seems to, really be a good listener during this process is very, very helpful. Um, Reflecting back what you have heard from the individual, and then kind of restating things in such a way that you begin to expand their horizons on, yeah, just by the nature of the conversation that we're having here, yeah, this does seem like it's going to take a little more time than I thought, but I think it's going to be worth it. So not that you're trying to do a hard sell on what the benefits of this exercise will be, but as you're engaging the person and discussing things with them, if they get the sense that, yeah, you know what, this is going to be worth the investment, then hopefully you can get them to slow down a little bit and take more of a walk with you through the process and an exchange of ideas.
I've also found that if you just simply acknowledge the time frame that the person's trying to work within while you're asking the questions and you're trying to get to the additional information, um, then they at least know that they are trying to
Yeah.
you know, they have a sense of urgency or timeline that's in the forefront of their mind, and you're acknowledging that, and then
Right.
they'll be like, okay, you know, then you can relax. They can maybe relax a little bit and allow you to get to the question. It's like, I know we got to get there, and I know you have this deadline. Just indulge me a little bit to ask these questions.
Right.
And
So
I would flip it a little bit, Yvette, because there are people that are storytellers and they
absolutely,
speak in story. And so the questions themselves interrupt their expression and thought process. So they're never going to get to the issue.
hmm,
They're not going to tell you what the issue is because I didn't get a chance to tell you my story.
right,
And
right,
so it's also, that's like a big watch out for critical thinkers. Like, yes, you want to ask all your questions, but you have to give room and grace to the other person to be themselves and express them in the way that they want to.
right.
So it,
I want to add that, and Paul, this is to me a fascinating conversation, and it brought flashbacks of when I was going to law school. And and by the way, I'm not a lawyer, for people out there. Don't call me about that. I'm not a lawyer, but I did spend a couple of years in law school. But there's a way that they teach you in law school to think about problems that maybe could be beneficial to this conversation. They use the IRAC model. It's issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion. And I will tell you, that's probably one of the most invaluable lessons I've learned in any level of education I've had, is the ability to look at the issue. What are the rules that apply? Create an analysis based on the issue and the rules, which keeps it fairly objective. And then the conclusion, I think, incorporate what we need to do is add, and what about the people? So you can get to your conclusion and add the caveat of, and the people matter too. How does this affect people? And then you can get to the right outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice framework.
And I think if we really, critical thinkers really want other people to think also.
Mm-hmm.
So, so we are giving them that time. We should be giving them that time to also think. I think some of those people who want to hurry up through the process are those sometimes are those who just give me the answer. I got to go. Just give me the answer. I don't
Right.
have time
Right.
to be thinking. We don't have that kind of time. So
Right.
it's like, I think, you know, but really critical thinkers, I'm bringing forth a thought or a question because I want you to think, and I want you to think beyond the box, not outside the box. Forget the box, right? Let's just
Right.
throw up all up and just go for it. So I want to let's see where we're going to end up with that, as opposed to, all right, just give me the answer. If you would just give me the answer. So I think that's where
so
we want
it
to move from.
Right.
so it feels like your communication style is vital to the success of being able to work with others and organizations, you know, having that savvy to maybe ask a thought-provoking question of them, to have them think a little bit more broader. That's what it
Hmm.
sounds like to me. And I loved Delpha's example of the format for law school, you know, and that would definitely work. I think, you know, for the R, the rule section, a lot of organizations are dealing with situations where there may not be, you know, protocol, you know, prior things that have worked in other areas. So the rules aren't quite so defined. They're more
Right.
subjective. So maybe looking at various options that could possibly go there, you know, to just extend it beyond the legal field.
So, great conversation. So, Paul and others, um, I know there have been times in my life working with various different organizations, whether it was a volunteer organization or whatever, um, that, and maybe it was my word choice, maybe it was my style of questioning, I don't know, or my impatience that somebody has not thought through a process first. Um, but or don't see the system. They want to just head down a path without considering everything else in the social system.
Mm.
And an organization is a social system.
Right.
Uh, So I'm sure there are times that I could have improved my style, my word choice. Um, but instead, I think sometimes people look at a critical thinker as being, you're just getting in the way, or you're being negative, or you're slowing things down. And I know you all touched on various aspects of this already. So, how does anybody avoid being uh, labeled as being overly critical and overly judgmental
Mm.
versus just, no, I'm thinking critically. That's all I'm doing. I'm not trying to be critical of you or the process. I'm not trying to be judgmental.
Well, I think
Right.
what's the difference? I think Paul really is the question here. What's the difference between being critical versus a critical thinker?
Sure. So, yeah, really, someone who is critical, I view as somebody who is just really that skeptic, looking to just kind of pick apart whatever's there that needs to be looked at. And I think that somebody who tends to be a good critical thinker, you have to be careful that you don't just kind of look at something and just start saying, yeah, okay, well, I see this flaw, I see this hole, I see this need, I see this gap. Uh, so certainly, you need to keep it as objective as possible, and not just be a skeptic or a deconstructionist. Uh, the judgmental. When I think of judgmental, I think of somebody who is already coming, and we've talked about this earlier. Somebody who's coming with a bias or a preconceived notion, or they already know why something is happening the way it is, and there's really, kind of nothing to be explored further because I've already got the thing figured out. And yeah, and both of those things, they really veer from true critical thinking, which is just, you know, very objective, trying to get at the facts. And, you know, David, to get at your question a little bit too, and this is something Edwina hit on, is, yeah, try to be as aware as you can, I guess, of what of the social style or the personality style of the individual that you're working with. And if there's somebody that is that kind of that type A, and let's get to the bottom line, let's get here quickly. Um, Not that you want to skip the steps, not that you want to shortcut the process, but perhaps fewer words might be better. Um, Somebody who wants to kind of maybe spend a little bit more time with the brainstorming or the ideation process, and wants to kind of maybe go off course a little bit. If you have the time, allow them that time to kind of, rip, if you will, and kind of share a little bit more of what beyond the bounds might be of the subject matter. Uh, Hopefully, they get the feeling that, okay, yeah, I think this guy David gets me, and so he's not just coming in here to impose this very cold, sterile process. He allowed the two of us to have a really genuine dialogue. And so I know it's difficult in a group to play to different people within the audience, but to the degree you have one-on-one opportunities, if you can gear the whole process to that individual style, that's probably going to be more advantageous for you.
Yep. Good points.
And I think we know when people start crossing into that judgmental because the tone, they may still be saying words that a critical thinker, but the tone will
Mm-hmm.
change. It's like, well, why would you do that? It's very
Yeah.
different than let's think about why people are going to behave or respond in that manner. That's very different, right? Because now that first way I asked it is, I'm already telling you I think that's a stupid thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right.
But when I ask, well, let's think about why others would respond that way so we are prepared to be able to address it before it even gets there. That's very different. So when you find yourself and your tone changing because now your biases or your core values or beliefs are starting to come out loud and clear, and not that our core values, but our biases, right? Then you've flipped over or cross the line into judgmental.
Right.
And it even goes back to your original example, Paul, where it was a very simple one in a sense about, do we communicate that nothing's happening, or do we just do nothing because nothing's happening in our organization this week with the merger or acquisition? Um,
Right.
so just acknowledging the other person to say, I see where you're coming from, Paul. I get it. I understand the logic behind not communicating because there's nothing to really say. However, let's just think about what people might be thinking when we've been communicating every week all along, and that's one of our values. If we suddenly stop, what might be the implication of that? I'm just asking. That's
Yes.
the thing. So
Yeah. The other thing too is, I think sometimes, and I've fallen into this trap where, hey, I really, this is in the context of, let's say, working through a project. Hey, I want to show everybody that I'm really on top of this project, because I'm one of the leaders. And so, my Excel file is going to have more columns than everybody else. And it's going to have every iteration of whatever, anybody could want, because I want to show everybody that I'm on top of things, right? And one time I kind of went into a project that way, and someone who was a little more seasoned pulled me aside and said, Paul, this is really good stuff for you to have as backup. But in the context of a meeting, these 5 columns are really what people are interested in. And if someone wants to delve past that, if it makes sense to do that in the meeting, great. If it's an offline meeting, that's wonderful. So try it with the 4 columns. And so then my first tab became just those 4 columns. And wouldn't you know it, people were just like, okay, yeah, now we can go through and we can really understand where we're at with the project, high level, who needs to do what, who are the people that are kind of, key to getting this next phase of the project done. And you've got the backup there if you need it. But that's another thing to think about when you're kind of working in the context of a group is that, what am I trying, what am I trying to prove here? I need to be about really getting people on board with this project. And I'm not going to worry about if they think I'm the most detailed person in the whole world, because quite frankly, I'm not anyway. And so if these 4 columns are going to do it for everybody, then let's do these 4 columns. So.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Somebody going to jump in? Go ahead.
Well,
Amanda.
I was going to say, so it feels like to be a critical thinker, it does require some amount of humility, of not thinking that you just know everything at face value. It feels like it requires some curiosity. It feels like it requires, that whole notion of, let me learn from wherever I can learn from. Let me gather the information I need to make the best decision, and not just thinking that I already know everything I need to know.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
For sure.
I think you're right. I think it's such a key trait in the process. And that's just another way too of building and enhancing the relationships, developing trust. And, again, not trying to go in there and prove that you're the right person for this particular project, but hey, I'm on this journey with you and I need to learn. We all need to learn, and let's do it together.
Yeah. When you said that, I remember someone saying to me once, you come in and you already have the answer, and you're trying to get everybody else to get to that answer, right? Early in my career, and it's like, yeah, okay. So you need to back off of that, because we're finding the importance of having employee engagement now, and engagement with the people who are around us, whether it's in business or ministry or in the community. We want other people to think through it, because if they don't feel that they're a part of it, then you're going to end up doing this solo, because they figure, oh, you got it, so you might as well do it. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with all of you in saying that you may have completed a lot of research, you may have completed a lot of thought to it, but you don't have it all. Your perspective is a perspective. Not that it's less than, but it is a perspective. Now be open to other perspectives so that you can get to the greater.
Right.
Yeah, being open like that prevents so much disappointment because people are married to the idea that I'm in a meeting, I'm going to present, and they're going to buy in, and it's going to be a good day. And you could walk out with nobody bought into it, and maybe they think I'm wrong. And that's not really what's happening. What's happening is they're going through their own process. And in the end, they could come to the exact conclusion you want them to come to. But
Absolutely.
you
Yes.
gotta let people go through their process. Because
Right.
while you've done the critical thinking part and now you're delivering, they gotta go through the critical thinking part. And you have to be okay with that process happening too.
So true. Because you tend to know the subject matter so well
Yeah.
that you're like, man, I'm going to present and then I'm going to close this deal and this is going to be great. So
Yeah.
if you have that expectation, 99% of the meetings you're going to walk out of are going to be like, oh man, I failed. And that's just not true. Like you said, people need to process their own timeline and they need to process in different ways, right? You may need to do several one-offs after a meeting with different individuals who have some other concerns they weren't going to raise in the meeting, and handle it and work with them in certain aspects. And yeah, you have to view it as a potentially a long and depending on the complexity of the problem, a longer, a little more complex and sophisticated process.
Yeah. And I love what you said, and there is a variance between men and women in how we do this. There's a variance based on your background. There's a variance based on your understanding of the issue. There's so many variables in there that affect how each person around the table is going to think about it, that you really have to, I think when you're delivering a message, you really have to come in a way that leaves room for people to really get into the meat of the conversation. And what you see happening is you got 30 minutes, and in the Zoom world, you got 30 minutes. That's what you got. You don't got an hour anymore because everything's down to 30 minutes. All meetings are happening. They're all scheduled. There's no water cooler. You can't walk across the hallway. You can't do any of that. You got 30 minutes, and it's turning people into these robots of conversation and delivery versus engagement and critical thinking together.
Yeah, so true. And I just saw Gwen put a comment up there about, people like to be part of the process. They want their opinions and values to matter. And that's so true, Gwen. And part of that is what we were talking about before. It's being a careful, thoughtful listener and then reflecting back what you thought you heard the other person say so that they know that you either got it or you got it mostly. And let me kind of clarify, but particularly that ability to reflect back on someone's feedback is so important. It's not just okay, thanks for your comment, that's great. It's like, okay, yeah, no, I get what you were saying. Yeah, that's really an excellent point. And is that sort of what you're trying to get at? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Very important, I think.
And then there's those people who think after the meeting, and we may be losing, to Delpha's point, we may be losing those thoughts because we're moving a little bit faster electronically.
Yeah.
So those people who are, I just need to absorb this and come back. Are we giving them space and time to do that? Do we know who those people are in the room? So we go after him, and I don't mean go after him, in a negative way. I should say, so we go seek them out. So we can say, hey, what did you think about the meeting, or what are your thoughts? Because we know that there are those people who have thoughts, and people, sometimes label them as the quiet when they don't talk or whatever. And there, we've sometimes when we were in the buildings, we talked about the meetings after the meetings, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes those meeting after the meetings were really where the decisions were being made. Well, how do we do that now in this remote hybrid world?
Yep.
Yeah.
So speaking of going after the person, um,
I changed it, David.
and I know you did. So, but that reminds me of a situation many years ago. I think I forget what kind of a group I was even working with, but this was a person who was newer to our group, but also very seasoned. So I'm anticipating, okay, you can make decisions quickly and move on, you can keep up, etc. And during we had a break, and I went over to him and I said, "Is everything okay? What are you thinking of how the conversation's going and so forth? Because I haven't heard you speak up." And he made a comment to me that surprised me, and he said, "Well, you guys are already 3 steps ahead. I'm still processing what you said a half an hour ago." And I thought, oh, I wouldn't have expected that because I would have thought, differently. But so that was a good wake up call for me early in my lifetime. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you all for. Go ahead, Paul. Did you want to make a comment?
No, I was just going to say, I thought David had a great point there.
Yeah. So thanks everybody for joining. Keep your comments coming. Keep your questions coming. We're nearing the end of our time, so if you have any additional comments, please give them now. We're also watching the timeline, so if you don't have the ability to have your comment come up on the screen, we are watching and capturing them. We've gotten quite a bit of comments, people saying very useful information. Thank you. And so forth. So we're really glad that you're joining us and finding this to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
As let's do the round table while people might be thinking of their final comments or questions or additional ones while we're online. We are open to you adding your questions and comments afterwards, and we will watch the timelines to be able to get back to you. Let's talk. Let's start with our guest, Paul. What's up for you next? What's coming up in your space? What do you want us to parting thoughts for our audience?
Wow. First off, incredibly honored and privileged to be part of this group tonight. So I really appreciate you guys having me. I learned a lot. I learned a lot getting ready for this, but I learned even more just in our discussion and with some of the audience feedback that we got. For me, really, I would just love to connect with folks, and so please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. As far as I know, I'm the only Paul Semaniski out there. Or feel free to send me an email if you have any questions. If there's any way we can help in the marketing solution space, let me know. But even if you just want to connect, I think that would be awesome, and I would look forward to that.
Awesome. And it's been such a pleasure having you. You've been amazing. So, Delpha D, what's going on with you?
Oh my gosh. So I've published my 3 gratitude journals, and I'm excited that they're out there. So if you want to see them, you can go to delphad.com and click products and go look through the notebooks. But there's 3 gratitude journals that I'm really passionate about. I think it's important that we're not only cataloging the work that we need to do, the things that need to happen, but we're also cataloging the things we're grateful for in that day or in that week. I think that changes lives. So I'm very excited about them. I just have one of them here, and I'm so excited to have the physical book in my hand.
Nice.
So that's what's going on right now.
Awesome. Mr. Gallagher, what's going on with you?
well, thank you all very much, and thank you, Paul, for joining us. This was a good session. So in September, I'm doing a session with a budding leadership group with one of the local chambers of commerce, and we're talking about organizational culture, regardless of what type of organization it is. But what is organizational culture? How do you keep it alive? How do you insert a new initiative into that culture and make sure the initiative lives and becomes part of the culture, etc. So that's what I'm doing next month.
And Weena, you want to share what's going on in your world? Our world, your world, our world.
Nothing. Dissertating. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. I'm engaged in critical thinking right now.
Awesome. And while she's doing it, I did just put out a couple of days ago that we have created a program for ministry leaders called Realign, Reengage, and Run. So you might be able to pull together your leadership team, and if you really want to help them get realigned with their not only their personal goals but also the ministry goals and get back in place because you've been outside of the house of worship, you've been outside of there, and people may have been really disengaged. This
Yeah.
program we created specifically for ministries, and so reach out to us. We can deliver it in workshops, whether it's be live or virtual. So we invite you, Destiny Speak, we invite you to do that. And then also, my books are available out there for you: Conquering Corporate Enemies, Mind, Personality, Situations, both the workbook and the book. And the ebook is out there: No Bosses Allowed, Lead to Serve. We also are getting more calls for executive leaders looking for coaching. So we do those coaching with executive leaders. If you're an executive leader and want some coaching, reach out to Destiny Speak. We can certainly help you do that. Okay. So, Paul, thank you again for joining us. You were amazing.
My
Thought
pleasure.
Thought Blazers were blazing. So
Critically.
critically blazing. This will be out on YouTube at Destiny Speak. We'll also share the link on LinkedIn so people can get right to it as well, and on Facebook on Destiny Speak. So, and until next month, we don't have a topic yet. So, hey, if you have an idea for a topic for leadership conversation, send it to us. We're happy to consider it for the months to come. We meet every second Thursday to do just what we did tonight. Enjoy yourselves. Have a awesome weekend coming up, and please be safe. Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.